Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are once again going to get back to our educational speedrun series. Now, in the last couple of videos, some of the games have been pretty short, so hopefully today it will be a little bit better, but let's jump right into the action.
Zooming through the game with the bomb cloud start, trashing all your prep like it's modern art. Night on the rim, he'll still find the win. Chat's going wild, bro thinks he's Hikaru again. Oh hey, hey, he's smurfing play by play, beats you blindfolded, still sipping latte. Queens are flying, egos meet defeat, just another speed run on Hikaru Street.
So we're going to start another rapid game. Let's hit the start button and off we go. So we have the white pieces, and let's start out with the move D4. Now, as I've said, generally it does get a little bit repetitive in terms of the openings. It's kind of hard actually. It's D4, E4, C4, a lot of different options, but my opponent chooses to play the move G6. Now, normally on move 1, the opponent will play a move like D5 or Knight F6, and the main reason for this is that you try to prevent white from controlling the entire center. Now, obviously after the game I will once again go through everything, but for right now I'm going to play the move E4. So we got the move bishop to G7. Now I'm going to play the move knight to F3, and the reasoning behind playing the move knight to F3 here is that in this position I want to develop the knight, the bishop, and castle the king. Now again, at this level I'll be able to do this pretty much without any resistance in terms of general development, but nonetheless, the more that I do this, the more that it should help you guys to instill this understanding. So we get the move D6. Now here there are 3 squares that are available, and all 3 actually are fine. There's bishop C4, there's bishop D3, and bishop E2. Now as we're still at a relatively low level, I'm going to play this move bishop to I was thinking bishop c4 initially, but then I was worried that there's going to be some pressure here on the center of the board, so I was worried the bishop would be under attack. I think the move I'm going to go with is bishop d3. Now I could also put the bishop on e2 here, but on e2 it doesn't really do a whole lot other than guarding the knight. Now my opponent plays bishop g4, very solid move from him, pressuring this knight on f3, and now I'm going to go c3, protecting the pawn on d4. Now unfortunately, as it's a relatively quick game, I can't go through all the arrows and explanations. Now that's why with a lot of these videos I've started to incorporate some of the after game, or post game I should say, not after game, I don't know what I'm thinking, some of the post game analysis into it. So you get the move e5, another very good move for my opponent. Now here what I'm going to do is I have to look at the position and take stock of what's going on. Now my knight here is pinned, so I can't really move the knight away without losing my queen. So because the knight is pinned, this also means there's some pressure in the center here towards this pawn on d4. Very specifically, it's a little bit loose, so generally I have to figure out if I want to guard the pawn, do I want to push, or trade the pawn. Really 3 options here, and the move that I'm going to go for is I'm going to play something. I'm going to play the move bishop to e3. I'm going to explain something after the game that I probably would play in another situation. It's very situation specific, but there was a little bit of a trap that I could have tried to spring there, but instead I'm going to play a thematic move bishop e3, because now the pawn and the bishop both guard this pawn on d4. So you'll notice I have 1-2 guarding the pawn. He is 1-2, which means when black trades I take, and I will have 1 guarding versus the 1 attacking, meaning that if black takes everything I will be ahead by a bishop. We get knight f6. I'm going to go knight bd2 here, a move that develops the knight but also reinforces the knight on f3 and protects the pawn on e4. We get castles. I'm going to castle here, and now let's see what our opponent does. Our opponent plays knight d7, another very solid move, as black now has completed most of his development as well. So I'm going to play h3, trying to ask black the question of what he's doing with the bishop. I'll take back with the knight here, as the knight now guards the pawn and pressures this pawn on e5. Now thus far this is a pretty standard opening. Actually, it's funny because in this intro I was saying how some of the games recently have not been very exciting. I've gotten winning positions right away, but this might be one of the very few times where we're at move number 10 and we're headed towards a middle game where I'm not substantially better. So we get the move h6 here. Now after this move h6 is played, I want to figure out where do my rooks belong. Now it's very common that when you play chess you get this standard kingside development, knight, bishop, castle. It is also very common that you have a rook on a1 or a8, which doesn't have a clear path towards an open file. Now when this happens, what you want to think about is where can the rook go, or where will a file try to open up potentially. Now what I'm going to start with, I'm going to start with rook e1, and the reason I'm going to start with this is that when I look at the position currently, the file that's most likely to open up is this e file. It's very likely there's going to be a trade on like d4, which will open this file, or I'm going to trade on e5. Now we get the move b6. So here I'm going to go queen c2, reinforcing the pawn on e4. But now you're going to see what I was just talking about, because my next move is going to be this move rook a d1. And here with the rooks on d1 and e1, actually my opponent's not going to let me because my opponent plays c5 here, so I'm gonna have to make a decision. But after I take here, we're gonna get captures, I assume, with either the pawn or the knight. Let's see which one we get. Knight takes objectively slightly better in my opinion, but I'm not 100% sure if we'll get that. It's probably what I would expect. So let's see. We get takes. Now here I'm going to go rook a d1, and now you'll notice that in this position this rook on a1 is on the only open file. The rook on e1 isn't doing a whole lot now, as there are 2 pawns and a bishop on this line, but the rooks end up on the 2 files which are most likely to open up. And as I've mentioned before, rooks on open files, that is the best placement in the game of chess. So we get queen e7. Now I want to look and see, can I put pressure on this file? And the move I'm going to play here, this is probably not what I would play in a game, but I will play in this case, is I'm going to go bishop to b5. Now you'll notice I have the rook on the open file, the bishop trying to target the knight here, and my opponent most likely is going to put one of the rooks to try and eventually contest this open file. But as you'll notice, both these rooks that have come into the game, they're both on the optimal squares. Now I'm going to play the move queen to a4, and what I'm doing with queen a4 is I'm trying to further pressure the horse with the bishop, the queen, and the rook, but also the queen is pressuring the pawn on a7 while guarding this pawn on e4 from being captured. So this queen on a4 very, very well placed, bishop very well placed too. This bishop can't easily be kicked away. The only way to try and kick it away would be to play a6, but then I capture. So this bishop has a very nice home on this b5 square. It's also of course a classic wooden shield. We get the move a5. Probably not the best move, but at this level I'm very, very impressed because my opponent avoids losing the pawn. The pawn on b6 guards a5. Black is guarding this knight with the rook, the knight, and the queen, so I'm attacking with rook, bishop, queen, 3 pieces. It's got 1, 2, 3 guarding, meaning the knight is safe. So now I'm gonna have to go for something, and this is definitely not a beginner concept, but when I look at this position and I look at my pieces, I'm trying to figure out, where do my pieces belong? Now the rook on d1, very well placed. I could play rook d2 and rook d1. That actually would be a very, very logical plan, to go for a double stack, put the towers on the only open file. Very reasonable plan. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play the move knight d2. Now the reason I'm going to play knight d2 here is that my bishop on b5, very well placed. There's no way to kick this bishop. Queen pretty well placed, targeting the knight, guarding the pawn. These 2 pieces well placed. Rook well placed. Bishop on e3, no obvious targets, but I am spying the pawn and this pawn on h6 as well. So the 2 bishops, the queen, the rook, all well placed. Rook e1, I could try to stack to improve this rook position, but I'm going to play knight d2. And the reason I'm going to go for this is that I'm aiming to reroute this knight to c4, where we'll pressure all 3 of these pawns that black has. Now these plans are unfortunately a little bit more advanced, I do have to say, in the situation, because my opponent has not made any blunders. This is very clearly a very well played game thus far. I think this is what you want at the beginner level. You want to, with either color, when you play the game, it's nice to win, but most importantly, you don't want to end up in a situation where you lose the game very, very early. So waiting for a move. Let's see what my opponent does here. Now I will say also, at the beginner level, backwards knight moves, like rerouting knights on different squares, very, very tough concept. I don't really expect anybody below maybe like 1200 level to really be able to implement this in their games, but it is a very important part of chess as you get better and the game is not decided in the first 10 to 15 moves, where you have to try. Okay, we get knight h5. Now I'm gonna go knight c4 following my plan. Now because black has moved the knight on d7 is under attack, but rerouting the pieces is going to start happening more and more as you get better, because what happens is you don't have games that are decided in the first 10 to 15 moves. There's no big mistakes. Your opponents develop, you get to the middle game. So as you get better, the notion or the idea of rerouting and replacement or repositioning of pieces is a very, very important theme. Now for my opponent here, knight h5 is a great concept. Actually, the King's Indian, King's Indian setups with the fianchetto bishop, very oftentimes you want to play for an f5 move. So this move is a very, very good fundamental move from the understanding perspective. It's actually a little bit of a mistake here because black is now under massive pressure. The queen, the bishop, and the rook target the knight. This knight is offsides. It's no longer guarding this knight, so he might have to go back. But now I've also gotten extra time because I put my knight on the optimal square, and black went here and might have to go back. Now we get our first big blunder of the game from my opponent. He has played 17 very, very solid moves, and now we finally get a mistake with knight f4. I'm going to trade the bishop for the knight. I could have also just taken this knight right away on d7, but this knight on f4 could be a problem, as there might be some mate threats towards the king. So I'm just going to trade first, and now I can take with the bishop, or I can take with the rook. I'm just going to take with the rook here. Main reason being that this is going to lead to more material coming off the board. If I take with the bishop, black will be able to keep the 3 heavy pieces, the 2 rooks and the queen, on the board. Now we're going to get at least one of the rooks off the board, so black will only have 2 heavy pieces, a queen and a rook. And of course, I'm going to have an extra horse in this position. Less heavy firepower on the board, extra material you want to try and reduce or liquidate into a simpler position where your opponent has less forces to attack you with. So you get queen g5. Now this move is a great move also. Even though my opponent is down a piece, queen g5 is a fantastic move, as black is trying to go f3 to checkmate the king. Now what I'm going to play here is I'm going to play this move knight d2. This is, again, not a move that I expect most players at the beginner level to play, but I'm going to play this move primarily because it stops this f3 push. If black goes to f3, I take with the knight, and if not, I'm going to put the knight on f3, and now my king is actually incredibly safe here and can't be easily attacked. So we get the move c4. Now I could of course just take this pawn, nothing wrong with it, but I'm going to go knight f3. And the reason I'm going to play this move is now my king is very, very secure here. I have the king guarding the pawns, this knight here, which is very close to the king. So with these pawns, the knight and the king right here, my king is very safe. I'm up the piece, and now it's a matter of simply playing with good technique. Now, no reason not to play queen c4 for anybody who's wondering about the free pawn, but I simply don't care that much about the pawn, because here I have this extra knight on the board. So as long as my king doesn't get checkmated, or I don't hang any material, I should be able to eventually trade off a bunch of pieces. So I'm going to go queen b5, trying to force a trade of the queens here, eliminating one of the 2 remaining heavy pieces on the board that my opponent has, the queen or the rook. So my opponent decides to trade the queens here. I'm going to take. Now we're in the end game. Both sides have a rook, but once again, this extra knight should play. We get to move rook d8. I am looking here. There's no entry when I take. This is covered. This is covered. This is covered. Rook has no entry on this open file, so I just gladly capture the pawn. Now the main thing that I need to do is either bring the king and contest this open file and try to trade more rooks, or try to simplify, trade some pawns maybe, or trade off some more pieces like the knight for the bishop. We'll see exactly what the simplest way to convert here is, but I am going to win the game. We get king h8. I'm just going to take the pawn. Perhaps I don't have to, but again, without an entry on either d2 to attack all these pawns, or an entry on the back rank, which is covered, I'm not really worried about the square on d3. The pawns are guarded, the knight's guarded. So without an entry for the rook here, I'm glad to take the material. And now my simple way to finish the game is I'm going to start pushing this pawn. Another basic theme: if you have a passed pawn with a rook behind the pawn, this is the best setup for pushing a passed pawn up the board when you have the pawn going up, but most importantly, you have a rook behind. Rook could be on e1, e2, e4. When the rook is behind the pawn, the rook supports the pawn going all the way up the board, and it's a very, very effective setup. Get bishop f6. I'll go e7. If black takes, I queen. If bishop takes pawn, I simply take back. Now I have an extra bishop and a knight here. Let's see what my opponent chooses to play. I do give a lot of credit to my opponent. My opponent is only rated 866, but has played a very good game, survived for a very, very long time. So props to my opponent. I'm going to go check here, checking the king. I'll pre-move check. We'll see what we get. If king f5, I have knight d4 checkmate, so the king should go back. Another excellent move. Now I'm going to go c4, and the reason I'm going to play c4 here is now the bishop guards the rook, the pawn guards the bishop. With all 3 of these pieces guarding each other, there's no way that I can make a mistake and lose any of these pieces. Now I'm going to start to bring the horse into the game as well. Again, nothing black can really do with this chain here. I'm going to start trying to checkmate with the knight, the rook, and the bishop. Knight e5 also completely fine. Get h5. I'll make the check here. King f7. I think I'm going to go rook h6, checking the king. A lot of squares covered here. King has to go somewhere. We get king f8, and now I play the move rook h8 checkmate. Now my opponent played a phenomenal game, and there are quite a few things actually I want to go over here. Now what I've started to say initially it's very hard during an actual game here, is that there are 3 moves that are playable. Bishop e2, bishop d3, and bishop c4 are all reasonable. Now the reason I didn't play bishop c4 is at a beginner level, if you were to put the bishop here and your opponent plays a move like knight f6, there's a very good chance you could make a blunder here. The pawn is under attack. Let's say you play knight c3, you get something like this, and I guess this isn't the best example per se, but very easily this bishop can be targeted. Another example, say c6, say you play castles, b5, and suddenly there's all kinds of pressure. There's b4, the knight, the bishop, both pieces are very loose. So unless you know exactly how to play the setup with knight f3 and bishop c4, very specifically after knight f6 going queen to e2, I mentioned this for people who might be a little bit more advanced, bishop c4 is probably not recommendable, because when people watch these videos, I expect them to watch them try to, like, subconsciously their brain or their mind should internalize some of this stuff, and this is not a situation where you normally are going to put a bishop here. It's a very specific example, so if you don't know exactly what to do, then if you try to replicate it in some other position, you're probably going to end up in a lot of trouble if you're a beginner. Now, second point is I could have just played bishop e2 and knight c3 here. This is actually one of the most common variations in the modern defense, where white brings out the 2 knights, puts the bishop on e2. Nothing wrong with the setup. I just chose that I wanted to play bishop d3. Now, the one advantage to bishop e2 is if my opponent plays bishop g4, there is no pin of the queen here. I can even just move the knight and trade the bishops, for example, even something like knight g5. There are many ways to play this, and I'm never at risk of losing the queen due to the pin. But I go bishop d3. We get to move bishop g4. I play c3. Of course, not something like a3, just to, or let's just say something like knight bd2, because actually a3 would still be fine, because after bishop takes d4, suddenly the pin is completely in play. If I take the bishop, I lose my queen. If I play, I don't know, let's just say c3, bishop g7, black has 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 pawns, white has 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So I go c3 to guard the pawn, get e5, and now I play the move bishop e3. Now what I was going to mention here is that I considered playing the move knight e2 because this does set a big trap. You're probably thinking, well, takes, right? You still have the pin in play, blacks up a pawn, right? Very logical thought, but here I can actually play the move queen to a4, breaking the pin here where there's no pin anymore. But more importantly, I check the king and I attack this bishop at the same time. So when black blocks, I can take with the queen, or if black plays something like knight c6, I simply take, and now there's no pin of the queen, and I'm simply up a piece. So knight b2 is also quite reasonable, but I played bishop e3. You get knight f6, knight d2, castles, h3, takes. And this is something that I would point out is normally when you get a center here, usually you want to have a knight on f3. Now, there are many examples of this. Probably the best one is something like what's a good example? Something like this, for example, where you have a knight on f3 in this fill door, you go e4, d4, knight f3. Same thing with, say, knight c6, bishop b5, or any of these systems. You try to play for the big white center, but you always have this knight on f3. So say you play a pawn Ziani, again, knight on f3 with this big white center. That is the general setup. When you play for the center, more often than not, you want to have a knight on f3. So back to the game. I play this. h3, takes, we get h6, rook e1. Now here I could have played something like queen to c2 and brought the rook to d1. The reason I played rook e1 is that if my opponent were to play rook e8 here, black has a threat of maybe trying to win this pawn. So with this rook on e1 here, that's never really a big threat, because I can play even a3 takes, I can take with the bishop, and now the bishop and the rook guard the pawn. So that's why I played rook e1. Then I played for rook d1, trying to set up the rooks on the d and the e files. In this position, it's very hard to see any other good placement, because you'll notice there are pawns on all these other files. It's really all about the d or the e file. Now, the reason the e file is very important here is that both sides have knights which are potentially attacking targets here. So if something happens, say I play like bishop f1, you say you get a position like this, even very quickly the e file can open up, which is why I want the rook on e1. They go here, we get bishop b5. And now the one last point that I really want to make about this game is that sometimes you'll see structures like this where your opponent pushes 3 pawns and creates what I like to call like this weird like reverse triangle type situation. And when this happens, there are opportunities to create outposts. Now, this one's a very unusual one with the bishop on b5 and even playing for this knight c4 just to illustrate it. Very unusual setup. Probably what's more common, and this is just so that your brain sees this, is something like a Sicilian. Now, in the Sicilian, there's a very specific line here with e5, bishop c4, and d6. And you'll notice once again, black has created the same setup. Now usually when the setup occurs, you try to play for an outpost with this knight. I guess it's black's move, something like knight to d5, and I'm just trying to set up a random position here, something like knight e3. And usually against this structure, it's very common to create a bastion with the knight. But even here, it is possible that you could get some setup like this, where let's just say rook c8, knight c4, and you have this bishop and this knight, which are very, very, very well placed against these three pawns. And in fact, this is very similar to the game if we go back to it, where when we reach this position after knight c4 right here, you'll notice it's very similar. It's the same setup with the three pawns, and you have a bishop and a knight. So I just want to point that out. You won't see this setup very often, but if you see the three pawns like this for yourself or your opponent, sometimes they're outposts for a bishop or a knight, which can be very dangerous. And then after that, I don't think there was anything else really to explain. So that was a long, good game. We're going to try to play one more game. Let's hit the button. Here we go. Second game, probably the last game we're due for this video, because that game actually took a very long time. We get knight to f3. Now I'm just going to play knight to f6 here. Knight f6, d5, probably my two main recommendations in any of these knight f3, d4 openings. Now, what I also didn't mention previously after d4 is that one of the reasons with d4, knight f3 that you play knight f6 is here you'll notice that neither side can get complete control of these two central squares. If I go e5, I hang a pawn. If white goes e4, I take this pawn. So neither side gets the classic two pawns, or the big white or the big black center. So I'm going to play the move d5 here. This move is designed primarily to take some space here. Pretty standard so far. We get bishop g5, and now I'm going to play the move e6. Now this of course is a standard queen's gambit decline setup here, where I bring out the knight, I push these two pawns, and I look to develop the bishop on the diagonal. We got bishop d2. I'm going to play bishop to d6 here. Reason I'm going to go to d6 is there's no pin of the knight anymore, so this bishop is very, very well placed. I don't know why my opponent played bishop g5 and bishop d2 exactly, but now I'm going to castle. I expect bishop d3. We don't get it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the move c5. Now the reason I'm going to play c5, bishop guards the pawn. I'm trying to maybe play for some central space, but now the knight comes out as well. And there's suddenly a lot of pressure here, a lot of potential to create a big black center. My opponent castles. And now I could trade pawns. Don't have complete development here, but when you look at this position, the one thing you'll notice is that both sides have these bishops here that are hemmed in by pawns. My bishop has no scope, this bishop has no scope. Whoever gets to play e4, e5 and open up the diagonal first is probably going to have more scope. Both of us have great bishops, of course, on the diagonals, but if you can open this diagonal, for if it's white or black, there should be more play. So I'm going to play e5 here, as I have a bishop and a knight guarding the pawn, and I'm going to try to pin the knight on f3 with this light square bishop. So I'm going to pre-move knight takes pawn in case my opponent takes. I don't necessarily expect it, but let's go for it anyway. We get bishop e2. Not the best move. I think my opponent miscalculated that I can actually take this pawn where I've got two pawns and a knight attacking it. But what I'm going to do here is not so much about the material, is to show you guys the power of a very specific, I should say, pawn structure. Now my opponent will recapture with the pawn, and I'm going to go e4. And this structure, it's not necessarily the most common structure, but if you can get more space with pawns on d5 and e4, or vice versa with a bishop on this diagonal, this is a very, very dangerous situation because there's a lot of pressure here very quickly. Now I can't go knight g4 or bishop g4 as white has a queen and a bishop. What I can do is I can simply take this pawn on d4. My knight guards these two pawns, so I'm simply up a pawn here. So we get the move f3. Now my opponent is trying to bring the knight in. You'll notice here this knight action on e1, it doesn't have good squares. So f3, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but f3 is a way to try to reactivate the knight. Now I did mention how strong this bishop is on e7. What I'm going to play here is I'm going to go for this move queen e7, and the reason I'm going to play this move is I want to maybe set up a double A battery to checkmate, but also if my opponent didn't take, so I'll explain this right afterwards, but if my opponent took, I could take and then put a rook on an open file. We get f4. I think I am going to play, what am I going to play here? I think I'm just going to take the bishop. Simple trade here. I'm up a pawn. I'm looking to push these pawns further up the board. I'm going to check the king, and now there's a big problem here that after the king moves, I have this move knight g4, and suddenly there are a lot of big forks here looming. The queen is also free to come to h4, and very, very quickly my opponent is in a lot of trouble. So we got the move h3. Now I could play knight to f2 in one go, winning the rook. What I'm going to play is the move queen to h4. I'm trying to set up even more pressure here because this knight f2 move is still in play completely. My opponent can't really stop it, but now I've got this queen, which is extremely close to the white king as well here. This looks very, very bad here. Very hard to defend this position. In fact, I'm not sure my opponent actually can defend this really. Probably there's some way to avoid losing the next 2 to 3 moves, but overall this is going very, very badly. So we get the move knight to f3. Now white attempts to attack my queen. Unfortunately, I can simply take with the pawn. I've got an extra piece now. I'm going to go knight to f2, forking the king and the queen. My opponent will take, so I'll pre-move the capture here with the bishop. The reason I'm going to take with the bishop is I'm still trying to keep this idea of the checkmate alive on the king side with the queen and the 2 bishops. Get queen to f1. Good move. Now I can't take, so white recaptures. So now I'm going to go rook to e8. Now the reason I play this move, open file for the tower. It's not the only move because obviously I have 2 rooks versus 1 rook, so I'm ahead by a rook, which is worth 5 points. But nonetheless, rooks belong on open files, so why not put it on e8? We get rook to d1, and now I actually have a little tactic. I'm gonna play the move bishop takes pawn. My opponent's gonna take, and then I'm gonna sack the rook for this knight on e2 on the next turn, because if white recaptures the rook, I have queen h3 and the king is simply getting checkmated right here. There's no escape for this king. So my opponent should not take the rook. I thought about playing rook takes first, the other order. Both orders are fine for anybody who's more advanced and wondering why I played this specific order of bishop takes pawn rather than rook takes. Both orders were completely fine. Get queen g2. Okay, so now I'm going to go rook to e8. Now I've got the double stack on the only actually open file here. My opponent can try to go bishop c3 and create a checkmate, so I can't relax right away. If my opponent is smart, he will play, or my opponent will play bishop c3. I don't know if that's going to happen. It's kind of what I expect, but let's see if that's indeed how the game continues. So you get rook to f1. Now when I look at this position, I'm guarding the bishop with the queen and the rook, so I think I can just take here. There's no checkmate threat, so now I've got an extra rook and extra bishop. Simply a matter of conversion now with the extra rook and bishop. I also control the only open file. The main thing here is just not to get checkmated because I have this one loose pawn. If white could line up the double stack or take this pawn, it is the one weakness. If I put the pawn on g6, pawn is simply guarded and there's no way to crash through. Get queen g4. I'm going to take. I'll go bishop g3 here. I'm getting set to line up the classic doubled rooks on the 7th rank here, the double kebab as we like to call it. This should be over very, very soon. I simply have rook to e2 here. There's really no good move for my opponent. My opponent goes rook g1. There's rook to h2, checkmating the king. Now we get the double stack on the 7th. This, by the way, if you can get it in a game of chess, if there's a king on this back row cut off by these double rooks, this is a very, very strong setup if you can get this. If there's no big checkmate of your king or anything weird happening and you get this with the king on this back rank, it's very problematic because you always have ladder ideas. For example, say white goes rook f3 and takes, you always have this ladder idea. So if the king gets cut on this back row, it's really good. It still is good even if you get some other version, like just to illustrate it, something like, I'm just going to set this up. This is still fine, but if the king is up on the board versus being cut on the back rank, you'll notice there's no ladder checkmate anymore. So it's still good, but it's not necessarily going to be as effective. But if you get this setup right here with the double rooks on the 7th, and there's always this ladder checkmate idea, it's very, very hard to play. Now, a couple of quick things about this game that I wanted to point out. I don't know if my opponent just mouse slipped or what bishop d2 was, but I played this e5 move here, and primarily, as you'll notice here, when we get this trade, which didn't occur in the game, I have 2 great diagonals for the bishops. If you can get these diagonals, this is really, really good because the white bishop on d2 is hemmed in by the pawn. White would like the bishop to be on g5. Now, my opponent did have the bishop on g5 and then retreated for whatever reason. But here, I simply have much more scope. And also, if you get a position like this with the open diagonal, there are things that exist as well. I'm not going to give the exact explanation, but there's all things like the great gift. This position, it might not work necessarily, but you have ideas like this, the sack of the bishop with the queen, the knight, and the queen, the knight, and the bishop lining up together to checkmate this white king. So there are a lot of threats if you get a situation where very specifically you have 2 open diagonals like this, and your opponent does not. So then the game continued. Let's keep going. Right, I played this move e4. Normally the way you'll get something along these lines, I'm trying to think of a very specific setup, is you'll get something like, I guess I'm just going to set up a random position. You get something like actually it's much worse. With G3 is a good one for white. So let's just set it up something like this, for example. And if you can get this chain of pawns with the bishop and the open scope here, generally this is very good, because here you have the bishop spying the pawn, the knight and the bishop. Again, same sort of situation where white has this hemmed in bishop. If you can get the structure with the bishop behind, it can be 3 pawns, it can be 2 pawns, it can be 2 like this, it can be 3 like this. Doesn't really matter how long the chain is, but if you get the structure and it's supported and you have these 2 bishops with the knights on this diagonal, it should be very good. So let me see if there's anything else I want to explain. So knight d4, queen e7, right? So this was the one last point I want to point out. If you get takes and say a3, one idea is to go queen e5, lining up the checkmate. Another idea here is to put the rook on the open file like in the previous game. So we got f4, and I think the rest is actually pretty basic. There isn't much more that I want to explain, so I'm going to stop it right there. Now this video a little bit shorter in terms of games. We only did two games for this video. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I want to give a big shout out to my opponent. I won't mention the username because obviously we're trying to keep this account private, but big shout out to that first opponent with an 866 rating who played a great game and did not blunder for the first 17 moves of that game. So big shout out to that opponent. At any rate, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys have learned quite a bit. And I'm sorry that it was only 2 games, but I think 2 games of value is better than say 3 games where 1 or 2 of them are very quick crushing win. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys learned something from this latest video in the educational speedrun series. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back with some more great videos in the very near future. Hope you guys enjoyed it and have a great rest of your day. See you soon. Bye.
That smile, that damn smile.